If you've been listening to the Eat More Carbs podcast recently, you know Reilly and I are both in the middle of marathon training. This week, we wanted to highlight some of the things that we are doing to make sure we're ready for race day. We're also making sure that we're properly fueled for our runs, which includes carbohydrates and 2Before.
2Before is an all-natural pre-workout designed to enhance athletic performance through the benefits of New Zealand blackcurrant berries. Studies have shown these berries to increase vasodilation and prime the body to kickstart muscle recovery. These antioxidant-rich berries have a sweet and tangy flavor and will level up your performance and recovery. Use code Reilly for 20% off 20 packs and multi-serve packs online at 2before.com.
This is the Eat More Carbs podcast. Hello and welcome to the Eat More Carbs podcast. My name is Jenna Fisher and I'm here with my co-host Reilly Beatty.
On today's podcast, we're going to be chatting all about Jenna's recent marathon experience and asking her all of the running and marathon nutrition questions. If you have more follow-up questions from today's episode, make sure that you're following along with Jenna on her page where she provides fun weekly recipes and nutrition tips for runners. You can find her on Instagram at jenna.fisher.nutrition.
Before we get into some of the questions about marathon fueling, we're going to do our high and low. So Reilly, what's been going on with your week?
So recently we were in Atlanta for a wedding, and my high is we actually left Charlie with a babysitter for the first time, and I was stressed. The mom instinct in my brain was thinking about all of the things that could happen that were bad. We had a trusted sitter thanks to my aunt and uncle, but we hadn't met her yet. And I was like, oh my gosh, this lady's gonna take my baby. Just my mom instincts were being ridiculous. Shout out to Keisha. She was absolutely amazing. I almost cried when she left. I was like, please come home with me. Please come to Charleston with me. She was amazing. And it was just so great to have somebody that we could trust providing a service in our life. And I know this is something that you and I talk about all the time, but it just is so great when you can find somebody that you really trust with something as important as taking care of your child. So it was just a really, really great experience. It really helped my stress levels as a first-time mom. My low also happened in Atlanta. So we were there for a wedding, like I just mentioned. I like to have a plan with my packing. I'm the person that plans out my outfits. I use the little bags. I attempt to be very organized with my packing. I'm not bringing anything extra. I had my dress for the wedding. I had my shoes for the wedding. We are supposed to be leaving for the wedding at 5:15. The wedding starts at 6 o'clock. I put on my shoes at 5:12 to get ready to go. We're saying goodbye to Keisha, to Charlie. We have a 30-minute drive to get to the wedding. I'm walking out of our bedroom after I got undressed. I am wearing a wedged heel. The bottom of my shoe fell off. I took a picture immediately because I was like, this is my low. I have to tell Jenna. So I'm hobbling around the house. We are staying at my aunt and uncle's house. They're not there. I also have a small shoe size. I did not bring another pair of shoes with me besides my Hoka's. I'm hobbling around trying to find a glue gun, another pair of shoes for me to wear. I am hobbling. There's nothing for me to wear. I'm looking at Targets. We cannot be late to the wedding. The wedding is at 6 o'clock. We have 45 minutes. It's a 30-minute drive. It is now 5:25. We're going to be late to the wedding. I'm hobbling around. This is ridiculous. I had to hack off the other heel.
No, you didn't.
The other wedge of my shoe to make flats. And I now am wearing flats.
Please tell me you have a picture of your heels knocked off into flats.
I do. And I cannot wait to show it to you. I go to the wedding. Nobody knows. We're dancing later. A girl looks at my shoes and I'm like, oh my gosh, she's going to comment. She goes, I wish I had worn flats.
No.
I'm like, yeah, I just,
You're great choice. Yeah, totally meant to do it too.
I thought you would appreciate that low. I just feel like that might have happened to you too. So.
This could have been a story from my last weekend for sure. I didn't have that happen, thank goodness. Did you make it to the wedding on time?
We made it to the wedding on time. We were definitely probably the last people there, but we made it to the wedding on time.
Okay.
Because I was like, okay, we're going to have to go to Target. We're going to have to miss the ceremony. We're going to have to sneak in during cocktail hour. We're going to have to pretend that we were there. All the things. I was like, we cannot walk in during the wedding.
Yeah. No, you did the right thing. Would you wear the shoes as flats again?
No, I threw them out. They were crumbling.
They were done.
They were really old, to be completely honest.
Okay.
They were a pair of shoes I wore to prom.
Oh my gosh, Reilly, why do you still have them?
They still fit. They were cute. They were a Michael Kors. They were nice.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. That just I'm sorry I'm laughing at you, but it's a great story. How did you detach the other one?
I ripped it off.
Oh my word.
Anyways, all right, your high low.
My high and low is going to be a little bit obvious, but my high is that I ran a marathon this past weekend and I finished. So that's my high. And my low is that I don't know that I have ever experienced the level of soreness that I currently feel. Like the only thing that I can like guarantee you right now is not sore on my body is my arms. Everything hurts. And I am dramatic, but like everything actually hurts. So it's a new level of soreness that I am experiencing today. It's like a whole body situation.
Is it in places that you didn't know could be sore?
Yeah, absolutely. There was a point in the marathon where I like felt that and I was like, oh, that's a pain. That's a new pain we're having. Cause obviously like once you get into those like later miles in the race, like you're going to be feeling it. And when I started to feel that, I was like, I didn't know that like I could actually feel the exact point in which a muscle attached to my bone and it hurt. It hurt bad. And I was like, whew, like hope we're getting close to the end at this point. That might be even more of a low is that I just had such a hard time sleeping afterwards because I was so sore, which seems crazy because I was so exhausted.
So this was your first marathon. What, I guess, is your takeaway? Like maybe do you have two takeaways like as a participant?
If I could only pick two, I feel like there are so many things that I would want to tell somebody. I would probably say like, if you're not going to fuel, you're not going to make it. And I know that's like such a predictable answer for a dietitian to say, but your body runs out of steam. You have to fuel the engine, especially in a race that has uphills or hard terrain or something like that. Like you need to be so prepared and so planned out to know exactly when you're going to take your fuel. Otherwise it's just not going to go well. So I think that my top thing would be to fuel. My second thing would be to like prepare and plan for anything and everything. And that's so predictable, but at the same time, like it's just so true that you just have to do that.
You mentioned that if you don't fuel, you're not going to make it. So I guess what is the importance of fueling during a marathon?
Because our body needs energy, right? Like we talk about all the time, like our glycogen stored in our muscle and our liver. And at a certain point, you're going to be running out of that storage. So you're going to have to find fuel in order to keep yourself going throughout the race. I mean, I'm sure it's been done where someone has run an entire marathon without taking something in. I can't see that being something that would be without bonking, without hitting that wall. We see that so many times with like later in the race. I saw people on the side of the road just laying down. I saw people in the back of ambulances. I did see a man in flip-flops still running, but you know, that's a whole nother deal. But I'm pretty sure he had a pack on him full of gels and stuff like that to keep himself going. But essentially, like your body just needs energy. And at a certain point of a long endurance athletic feat, you're going to need to put more fuel in the gas tank. And that there's no way around that. You can't get in your car on empty and expect your car to get you from point A to point B. You have to stop to fuel along the way. So same thing with our body.
So knowing that fueling is important, can you walk us through what you did leading up to race day? And then let's talk about maybe before your race, and then we can dive into during the race a little bit later.
Leading up to race day, the days prior, I was definitely increasing my carbohydrate intake. I know you talk all the time about performance plates and using those. So I was leaning heavily into like a game day performance plate and increasing the amount of carbohydrates I was taking in without just completely, ignoring the other parts of a performance plate. But one of the things I think is really important is like being very familiar with the foods that you're choosing at that point in time. Not the time to try a new restaurant, not the time to try like foods that I know don't sit well with me or anything like that. Like I wanted to be very familiar with everything that I was putting in my body the days leading up to, and then the night before and the morning of, especially because I just wanted to know how it was going to feel. So it was things that I had done like on a long training day, like when I was doing my 20 miles, I ate the same thing the night before. And then the morning of, I kind of went back and forth on this, to be thoroughly honest, because I'd used both English muffins and frozen waffles. I decided at the last minute to do frozen waffles. I packed both. We were not racing in our home state, so I needed to find out how I was going to bring those with me, stay in a hotel and still eat them. So I toasted them the day before. I put them in a container and then I put them in a cooler bag and I just reheated them in the microwave. So like they weren't the best. Like I'd prefer that they would have been freshly toasted, but can't have everything that I want. So I used my frozen waffles and I put a tiny amount of peanut butter on them. I knew that from my breakfast time to the start time of the race was going to be a little bit longer than what I typically am used to. And I did banana and I also did maple syrup. So that was my breakfast. I'm also a coffee drinker. I have coffee every morning and I knew that I was going to get a caffeine headache if I didn't have a cup of coffee. So I also packed my coffee maker and I brought that with me. So I did have coffee beforehand too. And that's what I did right before the race. And then as I was walking over to the race, because it was about a mile away from our hotel, I did honey singer chews as I walked over. Definitely had a lot of carbohydrates that morning leading up to it, but it was all things that I had done before and practiced before and knew exactly how I was going going to feel having eaten them in the past.
So it sounds like you were practicing your fueling a lot leading up to race day. And this is something that you and I talk about all the time with our clients and our athletes and our runners, is that there's such a focus on like race day or competition day that we sometimes forget everything else leading up to that. But it sounds like you mentioned you were trying things out before your long runs to make sure that the food sat well and your stomach felt good before your race.
Yeah. And I didn't want any surprises on the morning of race day. So I wanted to practice that beforehand because I wanted to know how I was going to feel and how I was going to respond to different foods. The other thing that I did too the night before is I brought a bunch of Gatorades with us because I tend to be very nervous. And when I get nervous, my appetite really decreases. So I used Gatorade and some liquid fuel to get in, obviously hydration, but a little bit of extra carbs and some sodium the night before because I was having a harder time eating the same volume that I typically need or typically eat the day before a race.
That's so smart. I'm one of those people too that struggles with like nerves, and especially afterwards, which we haven't gotten there yet. I'm excited to hear what you did afterwards, but afterwards is a great time to also lean on liquid fuel. I also love too that it sounds like you brought options. Like you had different things that you were preparing because you just didn't know how you were going to feel.
Yeah, maybe if I got a third thing to say would be to give yourself options, especially with fueling, because in the past I have been more nervous and I know that my appetite decreases. If I hadn't given myself the option for like Gatorades or liquid fuel or things like that, like I would have kind of been like out of luck with making sure that I was really like fueled up and topped off for everything the night before if I hadn't really like thought ahead and made sure I was prepared for those instances, because I don't typically drink Gatorade like the evening before a long run. But in this instance, I was so nervous, I knew I was going to need a little bit more.
So it sounds like before the race, immediately before and breakfast, and then also the night before, it sounds like there was a lot of carbohydrates going on. What about like during the race? What does fueling look like during the race?
So everyone is different as far as when we might need to take in fuel during a race, depending on how long the race is, what you've had beforehand, and things like that. But I brought a bunch of gels to take during the race because I know from practice, again, I handle that well and I can take it quickly. I think one of the biggest misconceptions about running a race is that you're going to miss a Boston qualifying time if you stop and fuel during the race. And that is absolutely 100% not true. The slowing down that I did in order to make sure that I fueled and took in hydration during that run is what made sure that I got to the finish line and made sure that I had like a time that I'm really proud of and really happy with. And if I hadn't done that, like I guarantee you I wouldn't have been feeling as good as I did at miles, 24, 25, and 26. So a lot of carbohydrates again during the race and a lot of hydration during the race. I live in Arizona. It is hot and dry here. It's really easy to feel thirsty. I ran this race in Southern California. It was overcast. It was cool. I didn't feel like I was sweating and I didn't feel thirsty, but I knew I needed to drink water because if I didn't, I was going to just continually build on this dehydration, even though I wasn't like feeling thirst. So I think this is a great example. I know that we've had other episodes in the past talking about like hydration and sports drinks and things like that, that we can't just rely on our thirst to be an indicator for when we should be taking in hydration. Like I knew that when I was going through water stations that like when was the last time I took in water and when I needed to take in more, even if I wasn't necessarily feeling as thirsty as I felt during training, because like the climate, the environment that I was in was so different, but I didn't want to get dehydrated just simply because like in that moment at that fueling station, I like felt okay.
Let's talk a little bit about like the fueling stations or the hydration stations. A lot of the time when we're training and we're running, we don't want to feel heavy. So we do usually rely on that like thirst mechanism. But like you just mentioned, like sometimes that's not always appropriate, especially if you're running like a long distance, like a 26.2. What was your strategy with those stations? What would what recommendations would you give to somebody who maybe is running a marathon for the first time?
I would definitely say look up what types of fuel and what types of beverages that they're going to have there. If you want to practice, like say, for example, they have a specific type of gel and you want to practice taking that type of gel in your training so that way you can take the ones that are provided for you, that's great. And if you find that those ones don't fit well for you or they don't feel good when you take them or something like that, let's find ones that do and let's find the easiest way for you to take them with you. Like, are you the kind of person that's going to carry them in a pack? Are you the kind of person that has family or friends that are going to bike along the course with you and hand them them to you. Like there are so many different ways that we can do it. Me personally, I knew what types of gels were going to be on the course, and I knew when and how often they were going to have water and Gatorade, because they had other options for electrolytes that I wasn't super thrilled with, and I knew I didn't want to take those. So at those water stations, I always took water, and at the ones where they had Gatorade, I would take either Gatorade or water, because I'd done that in the past and I knew I was going to be okay with that. And then I brought in all of my own gels. I carried them in a pack with me. So I would take the gel right before the water station, because they have signs let you know that they're coming up. And then I would take water with it to kind of wash it down. And I'd get through a station rather quickly. Towards the end of the race, anytime that someone was offering me a gel in a station, I took it and I put it inside of my pack, because I was like, if something happens and I'm feeling like I need more energy or something like that, I knew, because I had practiced with the type that they were offering on the course, that I could take those with me and take them in addition to what I had brought with me.
So it sounds like you really had a nutrition plan that parallel pathed your training plan.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's talk a little bit about gels. What was your strategy with the gels?
I had time frames in which I was planning to take them. That's how I practiced taking them. Instead of taking them at certain mile markers, I planned to take them at certain times, and then based the amounts of carbohydrate that I needed on the number of minutes that I had been running. And that's what I did during training. Even if I had run an hour during training, once I was an hour into my race, I might have covered more ground than I did during training. But like at that point, my body was like ready for fuel because of just like times that I was used to. So I gave myself windows to fuel in those moments. And typically it was around a 45-minute, maybe if I pushed it, maybe about an hour in between every time I was taking in fuel. And I was aiming for about 45 to 60 grams of carbohydrate in that window.
I think that is such a smart approach, because a lot of the information that we see online is take a gel at mile 3, take a gel at mile 5. But I like that time approach, especially when you're training. Your training times might look very different than your race day times.
Yeah, 100%. And mine did. And I think it's totally okay. But to base it off of a time versus a distance felt so much more appropriate than being like, I needed it at a mile 3. For me, especially, taking it off of a time base versus a mileage base works really, really well.
You said 45 to 60 grams of carbohydrates. For somebody who is listening and feels overwhelmed by that, what would you tell that runner?
Let's start slow. Doesn't need to be that the first time we're on a hour and a half run, that at a 45 minutes in, you take 45 grams of carbohydrate in a single gel, especially if you're not used to taking anything during a run. Let's start with 10. Let's start with 20. Let's start with a rinse in your mouth that just gets some carbohydrates in your mouth or something like that, just to invite that pattern in and then move from there. So it doesn't have to be, and it wasn't for me that the first time I ran a long distance that I took that amount in, but I gradually built up over time. And like you and I have talked about before, the stomach is a muscle. We can train a muscle. So I was really comfortable and really used to doing that. And I knew exactly how it was going to feel.
Did you only fuel during your long runs when you were training, or did you fuel at other distances?
I think it just depends on like what we're defining as a long run, because anything that I was doing that was over a certain time, I brought something with me just in case. Just like we talked about, like with practicing, there were moments when it felt really hard to do that on a shorter run. So I always brought something with me.
But during your runs, it was time-based. It wasn't necessarily mileage-based.
Yes, correct.
What about after your race? Did you have a recovery strategy?
I thought that after my race that I would likely be hungry, because in my training I was, and I crossed the finish line and I was like, the last thing I want to do is consume food. That sounded so horrible to me. I drank a bunch of water. I tried to eat a granola bar and some like gummy snacks that they had handed out at the finish line. We had a little bit of a walk back to our hotel afterwards, but it was so hard for me to eat after that run. And that's probably the first time that I've experienced that. I feel like I've been pretty lucky with my appetite after a run, is that like I can usually like drink a Gatorade and then I'm ready for something. And we have friends in San Diego, so we had planned to go get brunch with them. But back in the hotel room, I drank another Gatorade. I'm sipping on it, showering, getting ready for brunch. I still consumed things when we went out to brunch. Thankfully, have chocolate milk on the menu for kids. That's okay. It doesn't matter. I knew the importance of fueling, but it was definitely the hardest time I've ever had to getting in fuel after any type of athletic event I've ever done in my entire life.
I remember when I ran my half and they tried to give me a banana and I was like, I will literally throw up if I eat that banana.
Yeah.
And I think it can be really easy though to think, okay, like our event is done. Like I'm done I'm done fueling.
Yeah. And it's definitely not. I would say that like the most important times to fuel are those last couple of miles and afterwards.
So kind of just wrapping up, do you feel like your overall impressions are?
I had so much fun. Like I would 100% do it again. Most people talk about, at the end of the marathon, you either are the kind of person that you're like, I hate it, I'm never doing that again. Or you're the kind of person that was like, I'm doing that again. And I think at like mile 8, I was like realizing that I'm the kind of person that was like, I'm going to do this again. I'm a competitive person. I always tell clients that I work with, like we can use our competitive side as our advantage. And like, that's my advantage is that I am competitive. It's always something that I was like not super proud of because it was always something that, I was like, oh, that's not a great trait to have or something like that. But in reality, being competitive is not a bad thing. It's a fantastic thing. Yes, everyone's going to tell you that you're there to race the clock. You're there to race your time. You're there to race yourself and all that sort of stuff. But like, it doesn't matter. And we can use that to our advantage, especially if you're the type of runner that's chasing a PR.
So do you think you'll, run another race with the hopes of getting a PR?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Also at RBSN, we like to do hard things. So
you're like, how about the one that you go uphill? I'll do that
the whole time.
One of the things that contributed to my nerves was driving into San Diego. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's hilly here. Like so hilly. And I'd never been to San Diego before. Like wow, what a great city. Love San Diego. But like we're driving in there and we're going up and down and up and down. And I'm like, this is where the race is. Like I am going to have to go up that hill. Like I am running up the highway hill tomorrow. Like definitely added to my nerves.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your experience. It's been so interesting to hear about. And our listeners who are runners have taken so much away from this. Kind of wrapping up what you said, you mentioned a lot about preparing for your race. So practicing your fueling, having a fueling plan, planning things out, and, being prepared for anything, having options. Also talked a lot about making sure that you're fueling during the race and stopping at an aid station isn't going to slow you down. And then also prioritizing hydration during your race and afterwards as well.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share about what it was like to run a marathon. If you do have questions for Reilly or myself about marathon training, about fueling for a marathon, please reach out to us. You can always leave your questions below this podcast, or you can find us on Instagram. We're at the Eat More Carbs Podcast. You can find Reilly on Instagram at reilly.beatty.nutrition, and you can find me at jenna.fisher.nutrition. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Please make sure you rate, subscribe, and review. And as always, remember to eat more carbs.